Hello, you are listening to the Hero's Journey podcast. I'm Jeff Garvin.
I'm Dan Zarzana.
Let a journey begin. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the.
Pretty good.
Thank you. Welcome to the Hero's Journey podcast, where we discuss your favorite stories through the lens of Joseph Campbell's monomyth, as well as Christopher Vogler's modern cinema-focused adaptation as presented in his book, The Writer's Journey.
This episode, we're taking a very serious and thoughtful look at a relatively seldom used genre, the mockumentary.
That's right.
Christopher Guest has forged a career out of directing and starring in some of what I feel are the best examples of the genre. Whether he's been a has-been rock star, a small-town community theater director, or competing in the cutthroat, I do not use that word lightly, world of show dogs. He directed two of the options that were on this poll for mockumentaries, and he starred in all three.
Tied for second or last place, depending on how pessimistic you are Waiting for Guffman and Best in Show, each of which received only 8% of the vote. This makes 1984 rock mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap the winner by a landslide with 85% of the vote. This film is not directed by Christopher Guest. It's directed by Rob Reiner, making this the fourth Reiner movie we've covered on the show. We did American President, Princess Bride, and Misery. So is he now the most appearing director?
You know what? I did because I'm a nerd.
Oh, I want to hear it. Yes.
I did a pivot table in Excel.
I don't even know what that is.
Spielberg also has 4, Reiner 4, and then John McTiernan has 3, and everybody else is 2 or 1.
Wow.
Good old Excel pivot table.
I love it. Maybe we can do a screenshot and post it on the website. That'd be fun.
This Is Spinal Tap was released March 2nd, 1984 in just 3 theaters. Very small release initially. After 2 months, distribution had expanded to 206 theaters. But with so few screens, This Is Spinal Tap only ever earned $4.7 million against its $2.5 million production budget. Still, the film received good critical reception. Ebert and Siskel independently scored the film 4 stars out of 4 in their respective newspaper reviews. And the film currently holds a 96% certified fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
The film stars Rob Reiner, the director, as mockumentary director Marty DeBurgi.
Hello, my name is Marty DeBurgi. I'm a filmmaker. I make a lot of commercials.
Michael McKean as Spinal Tap's lead singer, David St. Hubbins.
Dozens of people spontaneously combust each year. It's just not really widely reported.
Right.
Yeah.
Christopher Guest as the band's lead guitar player, Nigel Tufnell.
It's famous for its sustain. I mean, you can just hold it.
Well, I mean, so you'd have to...
You can go and have a bite. No, you still be hearing that one.
Yeah.
And Harry Shearer as bass guitar player Derek Smalls.
You know, David and Nigel are both like two totally distinct types of visionaries. It's like fire and ice, basically. You see, I feel my role in the band is to be kind of in the middle of that, kind of like lukewarm water.
Tony Hendra plays the band's manager, Ian Faith.
It's my job to do what I'm asked to do by the creative element of this band, and that's what I did.
Reiner, McKean, Guest, and Shearer all got writing credit for this film. But because the entire film is ad-libbed, they appealed to the Writers Guild to award writing credit to the performer of each speaking part, and the board of directors denied the appeal by unanimous vote. And yet, SAG is still striking with the Writers Guild, even after this blemish on their relationship nearly 40 years ago. Shame on you.
This Is Spinal Tap was not nominated for any major awards. In fact, it wasn't even nominated for anything until 2001, when a DVD special edition was awarded Best DVD Audio Commentary. Michael McKean, Christopher Guest, and Harry Shearer perform the audio commentary in character, and it is fantastic. In 2002, the Library of Congress deemed This Is Spinal Tap culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant and was selected for preservation by the United States National Film Registry.
I guess those things kind of make up for the lack of awards recognition at the time. It seems like the institutions are recognized retrospectively how great this movie was.
Yeah.
Okay, music fans, are you ready to rock? Squeeze into those leather pants, tune your guitar, and turn that amp to 11. This is the hero's journey of This Is Spinal Tap.
Act 1 of the hero's journey begins with the world of common day, where we see our main character in their status quo, normal life. I guess the first question that we have to answer is, who's the hero? Is it Marty as the director of the documentary? Is it the band as the subjects of the documentary? So anyway, the film starts with Marty DeBurgi, played by Rob Reiner, as he introduces himself as a filmmaker, mostly of commercials. But then in 1966, he went to a now defunct music club in Greenwich Village called the Electric Banana. And there he saw a rock band that impressed him with their exuberance, raw power, and their punctuality. I thought that was a funny line, because how many times do you go to a show and the band's supposed to go on at 8 and it's like 8:45 and they're still not on? You're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I got to work in the morning.
That's right.
All right. So 17 years and 15 albums later. That's some high production there. Spinal Tap has distinguished themselves as one of England's loudest bands. That's a
dubious distinction.
Right, yeah. In this scene, this little intro here that Reiner gives, I thought his performance as an obviously awkward, uncomfortable in front of the camera director was so apparent. It was great. Sometimes he's leaning up against a director chair, and then at one point he starts to fold his arms, but then immediately puts his arms back down because it didn't feel comfortable to fold his arms. He looked so awkward and uncomfortable. I thought it was a really great performance by Reiner.
Yeah, it's disarming, and it sets you up for, this isn't going to be a serious film. This is he's not it's like he's not a hack, but you can't quite take him seriously because he's so into this band that's obviously deeply flawed, but he's a fan making this movie, so it's funny.
That was the end of the world of common day for me.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I went forward.
Mm-hmm.
That certainly is the beginning of Marty's journey as filmmaker.
Yeah.
But I would argue that the protagonists of the movie are the band, particularly David St. Hubbins, played by Michael McKean, and Nigel Tufnell. I also would like to mention that when they're introduced in the on-screen credits, each of them is introduced as lead guitar, which is, in a rock band, there aren't two lead guitarists. There's a rhythm guitarist and a lead guitarist. Nigel is clearly the lead guitarist, but it is immediately an expression of their egos. Like off camera, there was an argument about how they would be credited. And this movie is packed with little subtle things like that. And I absolutely love it.
Right.
I included, so there's the interviews throughout the movie, and a lot of the interviews give the backstory of Spinal Tap, and they sort of establish where Spinal Tap is when the documentary begins. So I think some of that world of common day is sprinkled throughout.
Agreed.
And then at some point, you get the feeling that these interviews are becoming more current about what's happening in the moment on tour. And at that point, I think they become more part of the journey, because you get a peek into the inner thoughts and the perspective of the characters as things are happening.
And the fact that they were improvised.
Yeah.
Those interviews is so great, with McKean and Guest both talking about the origins of Spinal Tap. And they started out as a band called The Originals, but there was already a band called The Originals.
Right.
So they changed their name to The New Originals, and then the Originals changed their name to The Regulars. And they're like, well, maybe we can change our name back to The Originals.
Yeah.
We became the Townsmen at that point.
Stop wasting that time.
That's right. That's right. So I included in the world of common day their arrival in the USA. This established them as a touring band. And they open with a song that is really only funny if you know the name of the song, which is Tonight I'm Gonna Rock You Tonight. And we meet the players who we'll introduce later. But the other one little thing I wanted to poke in there, you just mentioned that original interview where they're talking about all the bands and the names of the bands and band names. It's a whole meme in the world of being a band, and they really nail it, is that they show like the early formation of what would become Spinal Tap. And they're kind of like Beatle-ish copycats in this black and white TV appearance, which is clearly Ed Sullivan Show. And Ed Begley Jr. is the drummer.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Is the drummer. And
yes.
The other thing they establish in this World of Common Day backstory interview is that they've been through dozens of drummers, and all of them have died in mysterious circumstances. One of my favorite quotes from this movie comes from this interview, and that is they're talking about one of the drummers died from choking on vomit. Go through this thing of like, but they couldn't prove it was his own vomit.
It was actually someone else's vomit. It was not. Exactly. You know, there's no real.
Well, they can't prove whose vomit it was. They don't have facilities in Scotland Yard to print.
You can't really dust for vomit.
And that's the end of the interview. So that brings us to Call to Adventure. The hero is presented with a challenge which renders them unable to continue living in the comfort of the ordinary world. In my opinion, the journey in this film is the tour, the promotion of Tap's latest album, Smell the Glove. Mm-hmm. And it's also this chance for Tap to reestablish itself as a rock power, because as we learn in a later interview, they are much maligned and on the downslide of their career, and they don't know it or haven't come to terms with it. And that's part of, I think, why we love these guys, is because they're a little bit clueless, but they love what they do, and they're taking it as seriously as they did back when they made Shark Sandwich. So the sequence that I identified as Call to Adventure is the opening night party.
Yes.
Fran Drescher appears as the rep for Polymer. So she's trying to wrangle the band, and the president of Polymer Records, their label, Sir Dennis Eaton Hogg, which is... So they're trying to gather him for a photo op. The waiters at this event, for some reason, are mimes, and the manager of the mime waiters is Billy Crystal.
Yes. Did you know who that other mime waiter is?
No, who's the other mime waiter?
Dana Carvey.
Oh my God! I got to watch that part again. How have I seen this movie so many times and not? Oh, another little tiny piece in dialogue in this scene. We learn they're pushing 40, which is in those days for a rock band was old. Although Rolling Stones are still at it and they're in their 70s.
Yeah, and so is Depeche Mode. Depeche Mode's they're in their mid 60s now.
Oh my God!
Isn't that nuts?
That is, that's...
And Dave Gahan always said he didn't want to end up like the Rolling Stones playing on stage in their 60s, but here they are.
Yeah, I think a lot of young artists say stuff like that until they get to that age and they still want to do it. And then they're like, well, I was an idiot. So what I count as like the big call to adventure is when Sir Dennis Eaton Hogg wishes them good luck on their North American tour.
Now, we here at Polymer, we're all looking forward to a long and fruitful relationship with Spinal Tap. We wish them great success on their North American tour. And so say all of us, tap into America!
Oh, so good.
So good.
Yeah, I agree with that. The opening party for the band.
Yeah.
Marty saying, I jumped at the chance to direct the documentary that you're about to see. That was the call to it. Actually, really, that's the crossing of his threshold.
Yeah,
actually.
right. Yeah,
so
I guess you're right. Yeah,
I suppose I'm wrong on all fronts.
Well, it's fair to say that a real documentary, if it's edited well, you find some kind of a story arc. But it's not a narrative story, right? It's a collection of episodes and incidents. So it was tough to nail some of these parts because so much of it is just comedy and so much of it is just a normal part of a tour. But there is a story that emerges. And so I found a lot of overlap and a lot of things where I'm like, oh, it's kind of, I didn't see a lot of stuff for that category. So I don't know. This will be interesting to see how okay, good. So maybe we'll argue a lot. Maybe it'll play out very similarly.
Next segment is the refusal of the call. Confronted with fear of the unknown, the call to adventure is refused directly by the hero. Sometimes external forces push back on the hero. So an external refusal is the limo driver, Tommy, played by a very young Bruno Kirby.
Yes!
He is telling Marty DeBurgi, who's sitting in the front seat with him, that either rock music itself or maybe just the music of Spinal Tap is a fad. It's a passing thing, he says. Later on, band manager Ian tells the band that they're discussing their tour and where they're going to sell the album. And he's like, yeah, we're not going to saturate the New York market, but Philly, now that's a rock and roll town. I mean, New York, like one of the biggest markets in the country. And yeah, we're not really going to do a whole lot.
It's a bad sign, man. Such a bad sign.
In one of the interviews that they intercut throughout the documentary, Marty reads a bunch of bad reviews to the band about their prior records.
The Gospel According to Spinal Tap. This pretentious, ponderous collection of religious rock psalms is enough to prompt the question, what day did the Lord create Spinal Tap, and couldn't he have rested on that day too?
Never heard that one.
Good one. That's a good one.
I mean, these are brutal. The review of Shark Sandwich is 2 words. Shit sandwich.
Yep.
So yeah, and this is we get the feeling for how maligned this band is and what they're up against. So many forces pushing against this tour that's just beginning.
A little later, band manager Ian receives news from Bobby Fleckman first, and then later from Sir Eaton Hogg, that the band's label does not want to release their new album because they don't like the cover art. It's Bobby Fleckman describes it.
Well, what exactly do you find offensive?
Ian,
what's
you
offensive?
put a greased, naked woman on all fours with a dog collar around her neck and a leash.
And a leash.
And a man's arm extended out up to here, holding on to the leash and pushing a black glove in her face to sniff it. You don't find that offensive?
No,
you don't find that sexist?
This is 1982,
That's
Bobby,
right,
come
it's
on.
1982. Get out of the 60s. We don't have this mentality anymore.
A bit later on than that, I mean, there's just refusal, refusal, refusal. I feel like there's like 10 minutes of just examples of refusals of the call, and it's all external.
But before you move on from the album cover thing, I just wanted to say the 2 big points are that Kmart and what was the other store? And Sears
are boycotting the album.
It reminded me of when Nirvana released In Utero in, I think, 1994, their 3rd studio record. Walmart refused to carry it because of the album cover. And Kurt Cobain, who has integrity as an artist, was like, no, change the cover. And the record company was like, really? And he goes, yeah, when I was a kid, the only place I could find records was Walmart. He lived in Olympia, Washington, and that was like the place to get records. And he didn't want kids who lived in rural areas who could only buy records at Walmart not to be able to get his record. And I thought that was, this is 10 years before that happened, and it's such a different reaction. But in the book world, it's the same thing. If Barnes & Noble doesn't like your book cover, your publisher's going to change it because that's, the distribution. So I loved that little detail that it was Kmart and Sears because both of those stores, Sears is gone. And Kmart's gone too.
I thought Kmart was gone too.
I've seen a couple locations across the country in my travels, but maybe they've been bought by maybe it's just local companies who bought it. But yeah.
That was my final refusal of the call, but jumping back a scene is Ian tells the band, oh, by the way, the Boston gig is canceled, but don't worry about it. It's not a big college town. Again, showing how completely ignorant Ian is as a manager.
I mean, not a big college town. Poor Ian. And poor band managers in general that have to break all this bad news and have very little control, right?
Right.
All right, well, that brings us to meeting with the mentor. The hero receives counsel on how to operate in the special world. I struggled with this one. There is mentorship throughout as Ian tries to give the band advice and ease them into the reality of the special world of this tour. I think the clearest moment overlaps with refusal of the call, which is Bobby Fleckman is really trying to give Spinal Tap advice on why they're not working. Like, you are an outdated, sexist
But what's wrong with being sexy? I mean, there's no sexist
group that isn't grasping what the industry and what the audience wants. This is she's in a lot of ways giving them an opportunity to shift gears, and of course they being clueless. Although you get the feeling that Ian is fighting an empty battle. I think he on some level understands what's going on, but he's caught between the realities of the industry and the band. I think later in the movie it's revealed that he's quite a bit more savvy than he appears. He's kind of sycophantic to the band in a way that defies his inner voice. And there's some scenes, I think, that reveal that. But I had that as a key mentor place. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know if you included this in a different section, but there, these little interstitial interviews that we've both talked about. There's another little slice here of Ordinary World, which is we learn in this little like fast food place where Marty's interviewing David and Nigel, that they've known each other since primary school and that they've been writing songs together since they were kids.
Yeah.
And so this establishing of how long and deep this relationship is sets up the stakes for what happens later in the movie.
Yeah, that's good. My primary mentor moment, I like you, I had some trouble finding them, but I thought the concert at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Nigel's backstage and he's complaining about the hors d'oeuvres, like the little tiny breads, are too small for the cutlets that they're supposed to put in it, and he's complaining. And Ian's trying to help him out, trying to help him through this crisis.
Oh, that's funny.
And ultimately tells Nigel to forgive the venue because it's just some crappy university. The University of North Carolina was the first public university in the country. So again, Ian has no idea where he is.
Does not understand
the venues
America.
That But then he says, just let's calm down. I don't want this to affect your performance on stage. So I saw that as a little mentor moment.
I like that. That scene with the little mini sandwiches. Nigel's an idiot, man. He's a lovely, lovely person, but he is adult. And it's hilarious.
I had one final moment.
Oh, good.
And it was when Nigel shows off his guitars and amps to Marty.
Oh, my God.
While in traditional mythology, the mentor gives the hero a special weapon or tool that helps them on their journey. I saw this as Nigel already being in possession of the special weapon, but he's just showing it off to
I love that.
The director.
I love that interpretation.
That was where I put that.
And obviously, the special weapon is this amplifier whose knobs don't stop at 10.
Yep.
They go to 11. I think the best moment in the movie is when Marty says,
why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
There's this long pause as Christopher Guest is chomping his gum and looking blankly at him.
These go to 11.
It's just does not understand at all the concept.
Final segment of Act 1 is crossing the first threshold. The hero must pass a barrier to enter the special world. Crossing represents the hero's commitment to taking on the adventure. For the band, it is their first concert opening the tour. A bit later, I thought this was quite a bit later in the film, but it's part of one of those interviews that are sprinkled throughout that talk about the history of the band. And at 32 minutes and 40 seconds, the band is telling Marty about how they became the band known as Spinal Tap in 1967.
That was the first time Spinal Tap came into existence.
Well, the whole world was changing in those days.
And also we had the world's ear because we had just released an enormous selling single. Listen to the Flower.
Flower People.
We toured the world, we toured the States.
Toured the world and elsewhere.
It was a dream come true.
Listen to what the flower people say.
That was the crossing of the threshold of the band itself in its current existence.
Well, that's interesting. I saw that as part of their backstory, like World of Common Day.
Yeah.
But to take your point, the journey here, I mean, at the end of the movie, they're reckoning with their whole career.
Right.
That scene with the critics is about, what they're up against. So in a lot of ways, this whole movie is the third act of their career, in which case announcing themselves as Spinal Tap is a crossing of the threshold. So I can totally take your view on that.
That's where my head was.
Yeah. I like that. All right. We got good stuff. Well, that brings us to the end of Act 1. We're going to refresh our coffee here and come back with side quests. Hello. Welcome to the Cafe.
It's going to be every segment.
It starts to blend into like a bad Michael Caine at some point. Welcome to Campbell Cafe. We're going to have some coffee and talk about the way we've been following our bliss since our last recording session. Dan, what you been reading, watching, playing?
I saw a really funny movie that I think you would enjoy.
Oh.
It is called Bottoms. It is in theaters now as of our recording. It opened a few weeks ago in very limited release, just 10 theaters across the country.
Wow.
Fortunately, one of them was a theater I had access to, so it is now open wide, so you can see it more readily now. This movie is Mean Girls / Heathers meets Fight Club.
What?
A pair of queer girls at the bottom of the social ladder of their high school start a self-defense club in order to get girls.
Oh my God. I have to see this.
It is really funny. It's a short movie too. It's like not even 90 minutes.
Wow.
It's like 83 minutes or something like
wow.
that. So it's a short movie, really, really great. Directed by Emma Seligman, stars Rachel Sennott, Ayo Edebiri. I hope I'm saying both of those names correctly. They were roommates at NYU, and they have worked together ever since. Ruby Cruz is in it. She was a standout for me. She was really funny in the movie. And all of these are new to me. I'm not familiar with any of these performers before, but...
Okay, I looked it up, and I'm shocked that it's playing at my local Harkins.
Why?
Because I'm in the deep, deep suburbs. I don't get small movies. We only get giant event movies. Rarely do we get these kind of movies. So I'm excited. I think I'm gonna go see it on Friday as my Friday film festival.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoy it. Michelle and I both. Michelle said she thought it was even funnier than Barbie.
That seems to track with Michelle's sense of humor based on what you described.
That's true.
I can wrap my head around that. God, it sounds great.
So,
you did a great
Bottoms.
What a great
Highly
description
recommended.
you gave it. That's I'm sold.
What was your side quest?
I, as you know, Dan, have finished very few video games in my time. I believe Portal 1 and 2, the first two Tomb Raider remakes, Knights of the Old Republic, Jedi Fallen Order, and then we just as a group finished The Division. So that's 7 games over 47 years? Seems low. Unless you count Adventure on the Atari 2600, which I think I also completed.
Wow, that absolutely counts.
I finished XCOM Chimera Squad. All the games I've ever played have been recommended by Dan, except Adventure, because it was before I met him. XCOM is a series of turn-based strategy games that are notoriously difficult and scary because they're alien invasion and it's very intense music and tense situations. Well, XCOM Chimera Squad happens after this alien war, and so your team comprises aliens, hybrids, and humans, and you're protecting City 31 from a number of underground factions who are trying to undermine the government. And all of the cutscenes and the art is like comic book art. And the characters are witty and funny, and they have great banters and relationship. But then it's, kind of a true turn-based strategy game. A couple of differences I noticed from the games you've been playing on No Games for Old Men is that when you enter combat in this game, it's not friendly turn, then enemy turn, then friendly turn, but there's actually an initiative order for each character. And so you have this whole subset of decisions you have to make each time a character comes around as you're looking at the opponents between you and the next character. So who are you going to try to disable, fight, shoot, or heal? And it was so challenging. I played it a year ago and quit. And then I picked it up again. And honestly, from watching you play turn-based strategy games and realizing that other than just the combat, there's really important mechanics between missions. And so I've learned to more carefully manage resources and develop characters through training. You have to manage the unrest level in each of the districts in the city, and then overall you have to manage the anarchy level. So you have to develop these field teams and send them out. Yeah. And the final encounter was so difficult. I played it, I want to say 5 times with 5 different lineups of characters and trying to get the right kind of grenades and choose the right kind of weapons, even after having played the mission and knowing the enemies I was facing, and I failed. So I finally had to dial the difficulty back from normal, which is challenging for me, to, like story mode. And still I had to play it twice. So I felt like the final encounter seemed...
Wow, it sounds tough.
It seemed unbalanced to me, but it's really the first turn-based strategy game I've ever played, so I'm not sure. But the story was fun, the characters were fun, the gameplay is great, the art is great. If you're in the mood for a turn-based strategy game that's fun and not scary, I highly, highly recommend it. All right, well, let's, having wrapped that up, we're going to enjoy the rest of our coffee here. And
I'm taking mine with me. I don't know why you always want to finish yours before you go back to the studio.
Act 2 of the hero's journey tests allies, enemies, aka the Road of Trials, where now in the special world, our heroes make allies, meet enemies, and are faced with a series of tests that they must pass to prove their worthiness. The allies here, the band are allies to one another. We got David St. Hubbins on lead guitar. We got Nigel Tufnell on lead guitar. Derek Smalls on the bass. And Mick Shrimpton on drums for now. And then on keyboards, we have Viv Savage. And then I would also say that Ian, the manager, is an ally throughout, even though he has a moment where he walks out. I think he's on the band's side, even when they're not on their own side.
Oh, yeah.
Enemies, I had Janine down as an enemy because...
Me too.
Okay, good, because she's a classic Yoko Ono figure, right? The meddling girlfriend that's really operating for her own purposes and sort of using her wiles to coerce and influence one of the band members to the detriment of the band. And then Sir Dennis Eaton Hogg as a shapeshifter, because on the one hand, he's saying, hey, congratulations to the band, let's support their tour. But behind the scenes, he's banning their album cover, which from their perspective is an obstacle, though he's really doing what's best for the tour in trying to keep that album cover from being on it.
That's a good point. I had the record label listed as an enemy, but they're really trying to do the best for the label and eventually the band. Really, they're more concerned with their own bottom line and revenue.
For sure.
The band is secondary.
As labels always are. But the reason I put him as a shapeshifter is because we're looking from the hero's point of view. He begins as a celebrant and a supporter, but turns out to be an obstacle.
Yes, after the comma was going to be what you just said, right?
Oh, okay. And then I had Bobby Fleckman in the same spot.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned the show at Vanderbilt Auditorium in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and the dressing room scene with the sandwiches. The other thing I wanted to point out, I've watched this movie many, many times, and I didn't notice it until this time, maybe because it's the biggest screen I've ever watched it on, because in college and afterwards I was watching it on a 22-inch TV or whatever. There's a plate of Oreos that have already been separated. So it's like,
oh, I didn't see that.
The band wants Oreos, but they must already be separated. And this is a reference to, you've probably heard the green M&Ms story, and it gets interpreted as bands being super picky and pretentious and only wanting the green M&Ms. But it was actually one of the members of Van Halen who put that in their contract as a test to see if the venue and the promoters were actually reading their writer, which I thought was an interesting thing.
A test of attention to detail.
And I will say, as a band member who plays almost every weekend under contract, it's not a bad test because there are things that are crucial to a good performance that a promoter might not recognize and ignore. And so the green M&M test is important. One of the first tests that unfolds throughout this tour is the technical difficulties of performing a sci-fi fantasy themed rock show in a tour, which is, actually, this is before that. I'm sorry. They're playing Hellhole, and Nigel's playing a solo, and he goes back on his back to play this guitar solo. He's on the floor on his back, Jimi Hendrix style, on the stage, and he can't get back up. Because he's not 25 anymore, right? He's pushing 40. Right. And so a roadie has to come on stage and help him up. And there's this ridiculous struggle as the roadie's trying to lift him, and they're going around in circles, and he finally sets him on his feet again.
Well, wasn't he helping him do the spin on his back first? Wasn't that why they were going around in circles? Because you'll see a guitarist like flop back on the ground and then like spin around in circles on their back while they're playing the guitar.
I guess
that's how I interpreted it. Anyway,
I guess
not critical to the story, but
yeah. So, and then the other thing is that's a foreshadowing is we get lots of close-up shots from beneath Harry Shearer, Derek Small's the bass player, where you see just this enormous swollen cod piece in his crotch. You mentioned the interview where Nigel shows off his lightsabers in the form of his guitars, right? There is one little piece of foreshadowing there, which is he shows off his wireless unit, which plays an important part. Okay, back to tests. They arrive in Memphis. They get to the hotel, but instead of having 7 suites, the hotel has reserved 1 suite on the 7th floor. The interaction with this hotel manager is hilarious, absolutely hilarious. But the test here is that the band are waiting in the lobby for Ian to get their rooms sorted out, and they're looking at brochures, and they hear squealing, and they turn all ready to, oh boy, we got to sign some autographs. But the girls are reacting to a much younger, cooler rock star who's coming down the hallway, Duke Fame, and they want his autograph instead. And so not only have Spinal Tap have their hotel rooms been screwed up, but now they're being undermined by this younger, cooler, hipper rock star. And so they try to save face by like going to shake his hand, and their manager basically blocks him, says, get away. Who are you? And they say, oh no, we're Spinal Tap. And Duke Fame maybe kind of recognizes them and sort of magnanimously shakes their hand. And then Ian strides up and is like, oh, he knows the manager by name. And but Duke Fame's manager's like, Liam? He goes, Ian. So then Ian walks off with this manager trying to schmooze and kiss his butt and whatever. And the band are just simmering bitterly that they've just been humiliated. And they start talking about their album cover with Ian comes back and they say, hey, his album cover is even racier than ours. And Ian goes, yeah, but on his cover, he's the victim, not the women. And again, this was never discussed between Ian and Sir Dennis or Bobby Fleckman. And so to me, this was a peek that Ian really does understand what's wrong with the cover. He's just fighting for the band and sort of pretending to really care about the cover. But he gets why it's so problematic. And then they get the bad news.
I have a small piece of bad news. Although it may not be that bad. We're cancelled here.
At the hotel?
No, we're cancelled. The gig is cancelled. It says Memphis show cancelled due to lack of advertising funds.
This whole Memphis experience is a failed test. Not only are they not important enough for their hotel rooms to be booked, they get shunned by a current rock star, and their gig gets canceled.
Yeah.
Their worthiness is being put into question in a big way here. And then we get another interview, this time between Marty and Ian. And Marty says, the last tour of the U.S., they were in 10,000 seat, 15,000 seat arenas, and now they're in 1,200 to 1,500 seat venues. He actually says 1,500-seat arenas, which is a slip, because if it's 1,500 seats, that's not an arena. And in another great moment of brilliant sycophantic spin.
And I was just wondering, does this mean the popularity of the group is waning?
Oh, no, not at all. I just think that that their appeal is becoming more selective.
And then we get the explanation of why Ian carries the cricket bat, which is, it's an affectation, but he uses it to smash television sets, clear the catering off a table, and threaten people who aren't giving him and his band what he wants. The cricket bat comes back. Another test, and this is a test of loyalty and a test of integrity of the band and a test of Nigel's patience and tolerance. David's on the phone with his girlfriend, Janine, who announces she's coming out to be on the road with him. And he's thrilled, and Nigel is not.
Right.
This is the beginning of a crack. This is a failed test because Nigel's not honest with David, and David fails to recognize Nigel's and honor Nigel's feelings. And then an old song of theirs is playing on the radio, and they all go in to celebrate, and they're singing along. And then the DJ, after the song, says,
"Yeah, going all the way back to 1965, that one. Doesn't it feel good? With the Thamesmen and cups and cakes.
You're an
Of course, the
oldie.
Thamesmen later
You're an
changed their
oldie.
names to Spinal Tap. They had a couple of nice-sized hits. They're currently residing in the Where Are They Now file."
and it's like a blow.
The air goes out of their balloon.
Yeah, they really get it in that moment. And later at a sound check, they start rehearsing an old song called "Give Me Some Money," and it's almost like they're trying to take the note of your old stuff was better.
That's the song back before they were even Spinal Tap. I think that was when they were the Thamesmen.
Yeah, exactly. So they're in Memphis, and since they don't have a gig, they go sightseeing. They visit Elvis's grave, and it's a very funny scene where they're trying to sing "Heartbreak Hotel" in harmony, and they can't get the harmony. But it's a nice metaphor. This band is not in harmony. They are no longer unified. They are starting to fracture. So we get to Shank Hall in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They put "Gimme Some Money" on the set list, and they're sound checking with it because they're trying to recapture their 60s vibe. And then Janine arrives, and it's a giant wet blanket. You can see Nigel just deflate. And shortly after Janine arrives, Ian walks in with the box. Smell the Glove. Their latest album has arrived, and they open the box and they pull out the LP, and the cover is completely black. No image, no print, nothing. It's just black. And the band's like, is this the test pressing? Nope. That's it. One of the band members says it's like a Black Mirror. And it's funny because I had just that day watched an episode of Black Mirror, so that freaked me out. But, a Black Mirror shows a dark reflection. And so this album is a harbinger of the end of Spinal Tap. In another test, and this is the one I stumbled over earlier, they start this show in Wisconsin with a song called "Rock and Roll Creation," which must be from their album called "The Gospel According to Spinal Tap," because it's this bizarre, lyrical, indulgent piece about God creating rock and roll. And for some reason, at the top of the song, the band, the two guitar players and the bass player, are sealed in these alien pods. And one by one, the pods open and the band members emerge. First David St. Hubbins, and then Nigel Tufnell. But when it comes time for Derek Smalls to emerge from his pod, the pod won't open. And so the roadie is coming out there. He's trying to pry it open. He's trying to plug it and unplug it, hitting it with a hammer. And finally, he's got like a cutting torch he's trying to cut him out. That is a failed test. The technical aspects of their tour are falling apart. And then they have an interview with their drummer, and he's in the bathtub. And Marty says, do you fear for your life? And he's like, well, the guys pulled me aside when I joined the band, and they explain the history. And then Marty says, yeah, but the law of averages, right? It's just so unlikely that you'd die. More foreshadowing. There are some other parts that I could see as tests, but I could also see as approach. I wonder where you put them in. So they're in the bus, and Janine has bought David this horrible space. She's made him this horrible, puffy space-themed sweater that he's clearly embarrassed to wear. He wants to take it off, but she domineeringly makes him keep it on. This is another failed test of David. He is letting his identity as a rock star be subsumed by his girlfriend's desires. And then we get the interview between David and Janine, which establishes her as a clear Yoko Ono figure. She tells him what's good and what's not good from his songwriting, and she influences him, and he's really in her pocket.
Well, how does that go over with the other band members? I mean, you...
Well, what happens is she gives me the brutally frank version, and I sort of tart it out for them.
I think that's where I'm going to cut tests. So I hand it over to you. Am I already in your approach?
Well past. Approach to the inmost cave. The hero reaches the edge of a dangerous place where the object of their quest is hidden. For me, the approach was David informing Nigel that his girlfriend Janine is coming to join the band on tour.
Wow.
This is the beginning of the fracture in the band.
My approach are the following 2 gigs. I have to mention these parts just because they're funny. In one of the interviews, Nigel's sitting at the piano. He's playing this beautiful, soft piano piece. He's very influenced by Mozart and Bach. It's sort of a mock piece. And Marty says, "Oh, what's it called?" "This one's called Lick My Love Pump." So even when he's being musically beautiful and legitimate, his adolescent immaturity spoils. They get to the airport in Chicago, or actually would be on the flight to Chicago, and Derek walks through the metal detector and sets it off and takes out his keys. He's got a tuning fork, takes off his jacket, and of course the offender is that in his shorts, he's got a giant zucchini. For some reason, it's wrapped in foil.
Yeah.
And the aluminum foil has set off the alarm. I had these next 2 things as approach because to me they signify the real devolution of this tour. And I don't think, in my opinion, we're not in Vengeful Forces yet. But I based on what based on where you're at, I can see where you're coming from. So why don't you take it from here into Ordeal? Because I have a feeling I'm going to go so far ahead that it'll derail the analysis.
Okay, so the Ordeal. The hero faces the ultimate test, often risking death to overcome his worst fear, sometimes actually appearing to die. A lot of my Ordeal has to do with imagery and lyrics. But at the beginning, at the sound test at Shank Hall in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Janine arrives. This I saw as Joseph Campbell's Woman as Temptress segment, where the hero is derailed from their adventure.
I like it.
The Ordeal is also the central crisis. Crisis comes from the Greek word meaning to separate, and this is where David begins to separate from the band because of Janine's arrival.
Good.
Ian then, as we talked about, presents their pressing of the new album, Smell the Glove. It's completely black. David says it looks like death.
Ooh.
And so I saw representation of death. You mentioned this looks like a black mirror, and a black mirror is a dark reflection of the character. So Ian, he also says a line of dialogue that I was like, oh, put a pin in that one. Ian says, frankly, I think this is the turning point, which again is the central moment of the film. So I wondered if, while the filmmakers were discussing what points of conversation need to happen during this scene, they're all ad-libbed, but they've got little bullet points that the actors have to hit to make the scene move the story forward. And I'm wondering if that was something. Vogler also states during the Ordeal that a hero must die so they can be reborn. During the concert that you mentioned, those cocoon-like set pieces open up and the band members emerge from it, being reborn.
Oh, I love that. I love it.
The lyrics of the song they're singing, Rock and Roll Creation, out of the emptiness, salvation. The rhythm and light and sound was a rock and roll creation. I look to the stars and the answer is clear. I look in the mirror and see what I fear. The hero literally facing their fears.
I love this. I award you all points. Your analysis
the rock and roll creation.
Awesome.
'Tis the absolute rebirth.
Come on.
Lyrics of the song. So that is why the arrival of Janine, the presentation of the all-black album and that concert are the ordeal for me.
I think your analysis is brilliant and far better than mine.
Well,
you win at Spinal Tap. That's great, man. I missed all of that. What a great way to tease out the elements of mythology in a rock mockumentary. Really well done, man.
I thought they did a great job with that. I feel like that the lyrics of Rock and Roll Creation, they're intentional. That there's a reason that song is the center of the film.
I love it.
It takes place right in the middle of the film.
It does. 40 minutes.
Talking about facing your fears and rebirth and all that. Out of emptiness, salvation.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about your ordeal, or do you want to hold until we get to it?
I think you so clearly laid out brilliant evidence for why that's the ordeal that I don't feel like me making my case for mine is any good, because given what you just said, I can clearly slot all of my stuff into other sections. So I'd rather pivot here and wrap my analysis around yours. This is a turning point. I think my analysis should be reborn.
Okay, then
which means you have to do reward.
Let's do the last segment of Act 2, which is the reward. Having faced their worst fear, the hero seizes the object of their quest. Reward is where I had difficulty. I thought that while the presentation of the album not being what the band had wanted, actually having a physical pressing of the album that they can then promote was a reward. They got past all of the obstacles related to the cover and the problems that the record label was having with it. The compromise was what it was. So those obstacles surpassed. Now the actual printing was a reward. Christopher Vogler talks about campfire scenes in his book, The Writer's Journey. I thought the tour bus was as close as I could see to a campfire scene. Viv is playing his video game. Nigel and Derek are frolicking with ladies in the back of the bus. Nigel, he's got his feet kicked out. He's got his arms up on the he looks more relaxed and comfortable than he has the entire film. What throws a wrench in it, and maybe that is where, for me, the film shifts from Act 2 to Act 3, is the moments you pointed out with David and Janine at the front of the bus, where he wants to go to the back and hang out with the guys, but he's wearing this silly sweatshirt that he doesn't want to wear and he wants to take it off. And she says, no, you're reading up here with me. You can just continue doing that. That's probably the beginning of road back for David. But my reward, I'm not real happy with. But the campfire scene tour bus, that was it for me.
Let me see if I can prop up your ordeal with a couple of elements of Vogler that just kind of popped into my head, and I opened the Gospel according to Vogler right here. So one of the elements he calls out is self-realization, insight of a deeper type. Heroes can sometimes experience self-realization after tricking death. They see who they are and how they fit into the scheme of things. I think this is where Nigel starts to realize that his path may lie on a different. He has an artistic purity about him that he's realizing is clashing with David's. He's realizing something about himself, that maybe this partnership that's been carrying them is no longer his path.
Is that the scene when he's playing the piano for Marty?
I guess it's concurrent with your ordeal and the Temptress, because when Janine actually shows up, you can see Nigel is visibly physically detaching.
Yes.
And then
there was one thing I forgot to say about the ordeal, and it's about Nigel, because Nigel's the one who says it. He's holding it and he's saying, if you look at this color and how black it is, and the question is, how much more black could this be? And the answer is none more black. Like, this is the blackest, darkest point of the film, which again was another reason why I had that scene as ordeal.
Freaking brilliant, Dan. So I love doing the podcast with you. I love it. I love it. So, and then there's an element of reward called distortions. And I'll just quote, in other stories, the conquest of death may lead to some distortions of perceptions. Heroes may suffer from an inflation of the ego. I think Janine is inflating David's ego you're the leader of the band. This should go your way. She's pulling his strings, and I think he starts to drink that Kool-Aid. All right, well, I guess that takes us to the end of Act 2.
Wow.
Which means it's time to hit the bar. It's time to go to the Vogler Lounge.
Yep, looking forward to it.
Hello, Dan. Welcome backstage to the temporary Vogler Lounge, where we've got Janine's behind the bar tonight. She's making some cocktails. What have you got?
I have. This is, of course, a rock and roll mockumentary.
Yeah.
So I have something that I discovered called Hochstadter's Slow and Low 84 proof rock and rye.
Oh, gimme.
This is, it says Union made with straight rye whiskey, raw honey, navel orange rock candy, and bitters.
Oh my God.
This is a pre-made rye old fashioned.
I want that.
With the rock candy, the honey and the rock candy, I think, substituting for the simple syrup. Rock candy, of course, for the rock and rye. But it comes, this is how I found it at least, in these little tiny cans.
Oh my God, that's so adorable.
Just a little can of booze.
Little 100 milliliter can of this. I'm, of course, not going to drink it out of a can. I poured it into a glass with a whiskey ball. It doesn't smell offensive. I was very concerned when it was in a can. I was like, oh, what's this going to smell like? Is it going to be a metallic taste to it or something? There very well be. I haven't tasted it yet, but let's see. You can really taste the honey.
It's super sweet.
And maybe, it's not super sweet. Maybe that rock candy, and I don't know if it's, I don't know how they handle that. If they just mix it with rock candy and it just dissolves, or do they pre-dissolve it and turn that into a syrup and put that in the cocktail? I'm not sure how exactly they do it, but that is surprisingly tasty. For people who have a real concern about using aluminum cans in this particular way, they do sell these out of glass bottles as well. It looked like a full 750 milliliter whiskey bottle, but it's a pre-made rye old-fashioned. Slow and Low rock and rye, 84 proof, so that's 42% alcohol.
It's got a big bottom.
So this was good. I want to know what you have.
So as a legit rock band member for decades, I considered just doing the classic bar pre-gig between sets Jack and Coke, which is probably the most standard rock cocktail, but I didn't think that was trying hard enough.
A rocktail, if you will.
Oh my God, yes. And so then I went to Bevmo hoping to find, you know, some cleverly named hazy IPA or something, but it's really been disappointing lately. Yeah. So I got on the Google and I found the most outrageous Spinal Tap cocktail. There are many cocktails called Spinal Tap, most of them designed to look like milky spinal fluid, which disgusted me.
Ew. So they're not maybe inspired by the movie, but the actual, literal Spinal Tap.
The medical procedure. I found a cocktail that has so many elements of classic rock musician drink, and none of them belong together in the same drink.
Wow.
So I found this drink. It's called the Spinal Tap.
Okay.
It is 1.5 ounces of vodka.
Oh.
I used the Double Cross vodka from a few episodes back.
Okay.
It gets worse. 1.5 ounces of rum. It called for Captain Morgan's, but I have this really great small batch rum that I'm using instead, Navy-style rum, which isn't as sweet, but when you hear the other two ingredients, you won't worry about how sweet this cocktail is going to be. 4 ounces of Coke.
Oh!
And a splash of grenadine garnished with a cherry. So this is some kind of hybrid.
Gosh.
It's some kind of hybrid juiced up rum and Coke Roy Rogers.
Wow.
So I imagine the vodka won't play too big a part, and you shake it. Well, you shake it and then add the Coke so it doesn't explode all over the place. And then I put an ice cube in it. It didn't call for that, but that's how I like to drink my cocktail. So,
oh, is it supposed to be out of like a martini glass?
Oh my
typically,
God!
or?
Yeah, some kind of regular cocktail. I don't have any of those. I literally have rocks glasses. Is what I have. It smells like rum.
Okay.
It smells like a glass of rum. I don't smell the Coke. I don't smell the vodka. Well, you don't smell vodka, but
yeah, the vodka's in there just to add alcohol.
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
drink, to make it boozier.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, here we go.
It's pondering, accessing.
Oh my God.
I can't tell if that's a good oh my God or a bad oh my God.
So it tastes like a rum and Coke.
Okay.
I sense
That's
the
good.
vodka more than I
Oh.
taste it. You know, I can tell it's stronger than just a rum and Coke.
Yeah.
I must have not put, I put a splash of grenadine, like maybe a half teaspoon size splash. I don't
That's
really,
a pretty healthy splash.
I don't really taste the grenadine.
Okay.
Would not order again.
Oh.
Would just go for a rum and Coke.
Is it too sweet, or is the vodka make it too boozy? What part of that is making you not want to order one again?
Maybe I should have gone with a recommendation and done a spiced rum, because this Navy style rum is it's very molasses forward, but not in a sweet way, in that sort of earthy way. So it tastes like a rum and Coke, but then the vodka makes it strong. So when you swallow it, you're like, oh, that's not 2 shots of rum and a Coke. That's, higher octane. And I don't taste the grenadine at all, but maybe that's the sweetness of the Coke. So,
So the spiced rum maybe was supposed to balance with the sweet of the Coke.
I'm liking it better the more I drink it. It's a very...
That's the vodka talking right there.
I would drink 2 of these between sets and miss some notes, for sure.
You might even miss the set.
I would take a lot more than that to make me miss a set.
Jeffy's going to take a little nap now.
Oh, wow. Way off genre. All right, well, I'm going to enjoy this, even though it's a little odd. All right, let's finish our My Strange Cocktail and your canned cocktail and move on to Act 3.
Canned cocktail. Oh.
Act 3 begins with the road back. The hero is pursued by vengeful forces they disturbed when they seized the object of their quest. Now, given the brilliant strength of your analysis, I'm going to dive back into what I had previously called approach and start my vengeful forces there. Because I just...
Call to adventure, where the hero...
Okay, so they arrive in Chicago, and the marquee reads, "Welcome National Company of the Wiz and Spinal Tap." What makes it worse is we pull out, and it's the marquee on a Holiday Inn. Inside the hotel room, we meet Artie Fufkin, Polymer Records Midwest Promotions, played by a young Paul Schaefer.
Unrecognizable. I didn't know that it was him.
He is greasy and nerdy and overbearing and hilarious. So he is
greasy and nerdy.
Oh, his pate he's got a comb over, and it's just sweaty or full of pomade or something, but he is just,
oh boy,
gross. He has set up a signing at a local record store called Disc and Dat.
Oh, that's great. I didn't notice the name of the shop.
The band is there next to a full-size cutout of itself, surrounded by black records on display. By the way, the price on the records is $5.99. In 1984, the standard retail price of a record was $9.98. So these things are already
half priced already.
Off, okay? There's no one at the store. There are no fans. There's no line. Literally no one. And it is embarrassing.
Humiliating, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the band members is blowing their nose, and it's like, are they sick or are they crying because they're alone? So Artie is arguing with the store manager like,
business is terrible, Artie. What can I tell you? This is the truth.
I know business is terrible, but what happens with a record store with a promotion and nobody shows up?
This isn't a personal thing, Artie. Nobody's coming in the store to...
Forget personal thing. We had a relationship here. Forget about personal. What about a relationship?
those are the words of a promotions guy. And then he says, you know what? It's me. I effed up. Will you do something for me? I want you to kick my ass. And he turns around and presents his ass for kicking. And you see Michael McKean. You see Michael McKean smile. And in that moment, I wonder if that was an improv by Paul Schaefer that actually got him, because it was so funny. Later, they play in Cleveland at the Xanadu Star Theater. The names of these theaters are getting worse and worse. The Shank, and now the Xanadu Star. By the way, there was a rock club in that town that changed its name to the Shank after this film became a classic. They're in the Xanadu Star Theater. They leave the dressing room all pumped up, and they head for the stage. And they get lost in the labyrinth of the stage. They are going around in circles, upstairs, into broom closets. At one point, they run into the janitor who gives them directions, and they follow the directions and end up back at the janitor again. It is absolutely hilarious.
And the whole time, I mean, the documentary camera crew is still there, and Nigel Tufnell is still trying to stay pumped up.
He's making faces at the camera.
Every time he faces the camera, you know, he'll do like the tongue out and pretend to play the guitar, and he's like, yeah, let's go, rock and roll.
Yeah, they're trying to get pumped up for the camera, and it's just embarrassing. After the show at a restaurant called Seasons Family Eating, they are...
You noticed the names of these places where I did not.
I noticed them, and I looked them up to see if they were real places. Like I was, I was fascinated by the locations they chose in this film.
Yeah.
They're sitting in this booth discussing the curse of the Black Album, and it devolves into arguing. And then Janine says, well, it might sell better if it wasn't mixed wrong. Now, you guys, when a band girlfriend comments on the mix of the record and says her boyfriend's vocals aren't mixed loud enough, that is a turd in the pool. And so it's not a Snickers. That is a...
My headphones are falling off.
So, like, Nigel starts to openly argue with her. He can't hold back at this point. And he's like, oh,
he's done.
The album wasn't mixed the right way. And then she says, well, you don't do heavy metal in doubly.
Doubly?
I don't know how common this is, but you know, it's Dolby. Dolby is a noise reduction process that was particularly important in the 70s and 80s when everything was recorded to 2-inch tape. There's an incredible amount of noise. And when Dolby came out, it was like a miracle. But for her, it shouldn't have been recorded in doubly. And Nigel just leans in. Now, I don't know if the actress who played Janine improvised that, but if she did, that was absolutely brilliant. Now Nigel's just working up the doubly. Well, maybe if it wasn't a doubly. And it's funny because...
There is a doubly office just down the street from me here.
That's
I
right.
Can walk to it.
Doubly Laboratories is in Burbank, right?
Yes, it is.
Janine now, with the opening of having screwed up the word Dolby, presents that she has some new designs that she thinks will help reinvigorate the tour. She has decided to dress the band up as signs of the Zodiac, but really they're just horrible animal costumes that she wants. Each of them is like a goat, and it's just awful.
But of course, David gets to be the Leo. He gets to be the lion, like
yes,
the noble, beautiful animal, and everybody else is...
It's yet another layer of her Machiavellian ridiculousness. And trying to insert her meager creativity where she can in this, So Nigel very rapidly rejects it, and he suggests they bring back Stonehenge, this number they used to do.
Yes.
If they get this Stonehenge set piece, it'll bring back the vibe. They know the song. So he draws out a diagram of the Stonehenge, and Ian says, I'll make it happen. And then there's this interview just with Nigel and Marty. And Marty says, do you think you get the space to express yourself musically with David? Now, in prior interviews, they have been simpatico, talking about their history together, writing songs together. And here Nigel says yes with the solos. And then cut to He's playing this outrageous solo, strumming a second guitar with his foot.
Yeah.
And then he picks up a violin, and he's bowing the strings of the guitar with the violin. Stops, tunes one of the violin strings, and then goes back to it.
It's a cacophony. It sounds absolutely awful.
It is a mockery.
I'm known for my solos.
And that's actually a mockery of something Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin used to do, where he would take a violin bow and play the guitar, and it sounds awful. It's just.
Wait, Jimmy Page playing?
What did I say?
No, I'm asking, when you say it sounds awful, are you saying that Jimmy Page playing the guitar with a violin bow sounds awful, or are you talking about Nigel?
Yes, it sounds awful.
That's true too.
Both of them sound awful, but it doesn't
I'll have to look it up. I've never heard him do that, so I'll look it up.
Okay, so Ian hires a designer who, by the way, is played by Angelica Houston.
Oh my God, that was Angelica Houston?
Yeah, it's Angelica Houston.
I did not flipping recognize her.
It's crazy, right?
Whoa.
I didn't recognize her. I was going through tidbits and saw that and went back and go, oh my God, that's Angelica Houston.
She was great. Very small role, but she was fantastic.
You feel so sorry for her. So she brings this.
Oh, yeah.
She brings this Stonehenge set piece, and it's, a foot and a half high. And so Ian's like, oh, wow, this is really great. The contours and the colors. Now, when we get the actual piece, will it follow this exact, And she's like, I'm confused. What do you mean the actual piece? And he's like, well, when we get the actual set piece. She says, this is the actual set piece. He says, what do you mean? The Stonehenge, the triptychs were 20 feet high, 3 men high. And she's like, I know what they look like. Here's what I was given a napkin. And she pulls out the napkin that Nigel drew on. And sure enough, the dimensions are 18 inches, not 18 feet. So he
did the double tick, not the single. Oh, yeah.
So,
Nigel.
So at this point, we're like, oh, boy, well, so much for the Stonehenge idea. Cut to, they're on stage.
Oh, yeah.
Dressed in these robes. And this is this is my favorite part of the movie. Because Christopher Guest is so committed.
In ancient times,
he's talking about the Druids, right?
Hundreds of years before the dawn of history, lived an ancient race of people, the Druids.
And then when he gets to the big moment, he says, and oh, how they danced, the little children of Stonehenge. And here comes not the giant Stonehenge, but an 18-inch tiny little Stonehenge model drops from the stage. And Nigel starts playing his solo, which is like this Irish ditty on a mandolin. And out come these two dwarves dressed as Christmas elves, and they start dancing around it. And David St. Hubbins looks over, and they look over, and they clearly Ian has not told them that this is happening.
Know. It's amazing.
They are. This is the low point of the tour. They're devastated.
I almost picked this as the ordeal because it is such a shit show.
That's what I had as the ordeal for that reason. That it's the,
this was your ordeal?
This was my original ordeal.
Oh, wow.
Because it's so low.
God.
So
I was almost with you.
Okay, well,
I was almost with you.
Your analysis.
They look so horrified when they look at this little tiny thing descend majestically from the ceiling.
This is the moment where they realize things have gone off the rails. On stage, humiliated. So in the hotel,
my face hurts.
After the show, David is blaming Ian. And Ian is saying, look, he drew the thing with 18 inches. And David says, I know, but you're not as confused as he is, are you? You're supposed to know better. And Janine seizes this opportunity. She now wants to co-manage the band. She thinks Ian can't handle it.
Yeah.
And there's a big fight. And Ian here reveals his true opinion of the band. He says that this is an adolescent fantasy and that all he does is clean up after them and provide for their stupid needs, and he quits, walks out. And then we get another of the funniest lines that I quote in bands all the time when we're discussing the set list, is that in the silence after Ian storms out, our peacekeeper, Derek Small, says, I just want to raise a practical question at this point. Are we going to do Stonehenge tomorrow? And David says, no, we're not going to do anything Stonehenge. Just, it's now coming apart. And bless Harry Shearer.
Amazing.
His commitment, I mean, he doesn't get a lot of starring moments in this film, but everything he says is funny and adds and is a play off of what the others are doing. He's a brilliant improviser. What a career he's had as a comic actor.
Oh, incredible. I mean, still.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a Simpsons fan, he's voices several of the planet's favorite characters on The Simpsons. He's incredible.
At the airport the next day, as they're departing for Denver, and both Nigel and Janine are wearing cowboy hats, and you wonder if she's put it on Nigel's head because he just looks just completely disoriented.
Or is he mocking her?
Oh, yeah, maybe.
It could be that.
Maybe. Janine passes out these star charts that she's done for everyone in a lame attempt to build up the morale and say that things are going to go better.
It's incredible. It's incredible. She's going to reorganize the tour based on astrology.
She's got a binder. I mean, she is, bless her. She's given it her all.
She's putting in effort, yeah.
And then there's an interview, another interview or another piece of the interview with Nigel. And Marty says, how would you describe your relationship with David? And he says, we're closer than brothers. Brothers always fight, and we have a relationship that's way past that. Cut to them in the studio fighting about Janine. And this is fallout from David's choice to involve Janine in the band's business. Or maybe better put, this is a consequence of Janine's manipulation of David. So then we interview Derek, and he talks about how his part is that there's two visionaries in the band, right? David and Nigel, and that he's in the middle like lukewarm water. All right, so you thought Stonehenge was the low. They arrive in Denver, and they're on their way, and Janine happens to slip in. David knows, but none of the other band members know, that their gig at the Civic Arena has fallen through, and that now instead they're playing at an Air Force base. But it's not like a concert, it's a social event.
Yes.
And here's Fred Willard. I'd forgotten he was in it.
Bless Fred Willard. Rest in peace. He is one of the funniest men I've ever seen.
May I start by saying how thrilled we are to have you here. We are such fans of your music and all of your records. That's right. I'm not speaking of yours personally, but the whole genre of the rock and roll and so many...
I won't try to imitate his hilarious style, but he's the one that makes it clear that this is not a gig where Tap will have an opportunity to shine.
I suggest we get it over with. Can you play a couple slow numbers so I can dance?
He wants them to start at 1900 hours, and the band members are like, so that's what, 50 more hours? How many? And it turns out that's half an hour from when they arrive. And a show that size takes up, hours to set up. So then, as you mentioned, he requests slow numbers. Cut to Sex Farm. No one is dancing. People are literally holding their ears and walking out.
Yeah.
This gig is awful. And to make things worse, all of a sudden, Nigel's wireless unit, which he introduced to us in the Turn It Up to 11 scene, starts picking up like a police scanner frequency. David is laughing. He thinks this is hilarious. Nigel's so pissed, he throws his guitar down on the stage, and as he walks off stage, he just gives Janine this death glare.
The stink eye, yeah.
I am done. More fallout, right? This is vengeful forces that are the...
Oh, yeah.
It's just one after the other.
It's been like 40 minutes since anything went right for these guys.
And they do such a great job of setting up that first show in New York as a highlight, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. Next day, they're at the airport. Marty's interviewing David, and he's trying to convince himself that they just need to move on, that they've, the band's been through a bunch of personnel changes. And Marty says, I can't believe you're lumping in Nigel with those people that you played with for short periods of time. Michael McKean says, well, I'm sure I'd feel much worse if I weren't under such heavy sedation. Marty says, what happens to the band now? Is he coming back? And Michael McKean says, no, we shan't work together again. 2 more sequences. We're still in Road Back.
I know, it's incredible. These guys just keep taking it on the chin one day after the next.
So the next sequence, they arrive at the Themeland Amusement Park in Stockton, California. Now, state fairs are where bands go to die. The placement of your name on the marquee is very much like your credits in a movie.
Yeah.
It reflects the negotiation of your contract. And I will say, my band used to be called Catharsis, which no one could pronounce or spell. So we decided we're going to simplify it. We changed our name to 7K. We changed our name to 7K. We're like U2. It's very simple, hard to screw up. The first gig we ever played at the Derby in Hollywood.
Oh, wow.
We arrive, and on the marquee, it said K7. Like you had a 50-50 chance.
You had one job.
I was so pissed. So on the marquee, Puppet Show and Spinal Tap. Suddenly, second billing to National Company of the Wiz seems like a compliment. And of course, Janine, who is responsible for this travesty, says, but we have a big dressing room. And David says, oh, a bigger dressing room than the puppets. That's great. So they're backstage, and without Nigel, their set list is very limited. They can't play most of the catalog. So David's saying, Viv, can you play a bass line like Nigel does on Big Bottom? And the keyboard player says, yeah, I've got 2 hands. I can do There's an old joke. How many bass players does it take to screw in a light bulb? None. The keyboard player can do it with his left hand.
Band humor.
So they come up with a set list, and it's only 10 minutes worth of material. So Derek suggests, well, we could do Jazz Odyssey. And David retorts, no, we are not going to do a freeform jazz exploration in front of a festival crowd. Cut to a very empty amphitheater, and they are doing exactly that.
There's maybe 20 people in the audience.
So they're playing this bizarre freeform jazz thing, and Janine fulfills her ultimate destiny as the band girlfriend and joins them on stage with a tambourine. Finally, it is literally the end of the road, the end of the tour. And David's sitting down with a journalist who says, is this the end of Spinal Tap, or are you going to try to milk it for a few more years in Europe? And David has clearly not even thought about this. He is shell-shocked and probably quite high. And he replies with this bizarre, abstract, nonsensical, philosophical question about what is the end.
Well, I don't really think that the end can be assessed as of itself as being the end, because what does the end feel like? It's like saying when you try to extrapolate the end of the universe, you say if the universe is indeed infinite, then what does that mean? How far is all the way? And then if it stops, what's stopping it, and what's behind what's stopping it? So what's the end, is my question to you.
And then we witness a conversation between Derek and David, and Derek's trying to comfort David. They're saying, oh, we're better off walking away now. Who wants to be a 45-year-old has-been? Now we can work on other projects. like Saucy Jack, our rock musical based on the life of Jack the Ripper. And then they start singing one of the numbers. You're a naughty one, Saucy Jack. You're a hottie one, Saucy Jack.
They've already written numbers.
Yeah, and I will admit, all of us in rock bands have had lame side project ideas like that. And it's so pathetic and sad that they've come to this point that they didn't. It's like when a quarterback should have retired 2 seasons ago, but he sort of pees on his own legacy. Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
And this is them having done that. So I wrote that down as the end of the road back.
100% agree.
Oh.
Which brings us to the resurrection. The hero faces death one more time in a final battle or showdown. This time the danger is at the apex. Final show of the tour. The band is backstage. Nigel appears. And the band is a little hostile to him.
Mm-hmm.
They're at least standoffish. But Nigel says, I'm really just here as a messenger. I ran into Ian, and he told me that Sex Farm is charting in Japan.
Sex Farm.
and suggests we do a Japanese tour. But David is still angry at Nigel, so he's really not paying any attention to the message. He rejects it.
He suggests we reform and do a tour in Japan, implying that they're not Spinal Tap without him. Which, honestly, you guys, when you look at bands that have broken up and then reformed, there are literally bands like Live, one of my favorite bands from the 90s, Lightning Crashes, I Alone. When they broke up, Ed Kowalczyk could only bill himself as Ed Kowalczyk, formerly of Live. He could not say Ed Kowalczyk of Live.
Wow.
The contract and the ownership of those names is a huge deal. So when he said that, reform, he's making a huge claim about his part in the band. So when you see David bristle, that's why. He's basically saying, you're not Spinal Tap without me. We would have to reform in order to do a Spinal Tap tour.
That is great insight. I didn't really put much stock in that. I just thought that meant that Nigel would rejoin the band.
It's a little inside baseball for sure.
But still, it's good info for those of us not in the know.
There you go.
So the remainder of Spinal Tap takes the stage, and Nigel watches from off stage. At some point during the show, David gestures, like with a little head fake, to Nigel. Invites him on stage.
It's when it's time for his solo. It's his moment.
And Nigel rejoins, grabs a guitar, devil horns to the audience, and there is a palpable increase in energy from the band and from the audience when Nigel rejoins the band.
Yes.
That is the resurrection of Spinal Tap.
Yes.
Mid-show, cut to the same song. They're still playing that same song, but you cut to the audience and they're in Japan. So they did take up Ian's suggestion and they are now on a Japanese tour. I thought that was such a great cut.
Well, but the transition is they cut to the drummer and he explodes in sparks. He literally spontaneously combusts. And now there's a new drummer, Joe Mama Besser. That's their, and then they cut to Japan. It's like in order for them to reform, the drummer had to die. That's the resurrection, right?
I guess, yeah. Really, this resurrection of the drummer.
The other thing that happens is during his solo, is the goddamn radio cuts in again on his wireless, and you hear that radio frequency coming in again. Things are better, but they're not perfect.
But you know what? You see them, and they're having a great time.
Yep, they're back together.
They've hashed out a lot of their troubles. We see Ian standing next to Janine, and he's tapping his cricket bat menacingly.
Who's your daddy now?
That was the resurrection for me.
Cut to Return with the Elixir, our final segment, Freedom to Live. The hero, having won a precious treasure or reward, returns to the ordinary world. And that's where I added in they're in Japan, they're back on tour, Ian's in charge, the crowd's going crazy. That's the return to the ordinary world. And then we cut to black, and we have these great interviews with the band over the credits.
Yeah.
That are just bonus fun of ridiculous improv. And that's the end of the movie.
It's so good. I love that David St. Hubbins has been listening to the Namesake series, works of literature performed by people with the same last name as the author.
Denholm Eliot reading T.S. Eliot.
T.S. Eliot.
So ridiculous.
Yeah.
So brilliant.
Marty asks Nigel, what do you think you would do? Well, he asked all of them, but my favorite was, what would you be doing if you weren't in a rock band? And Nigel says,
a salesman, like maybe in a haberdasher, or maybe like a chapeau shop or something. You know, like, what size do you wear, sir? And then you answer me.
7 1/4.
I think we have that. Something like that. I think I could do, yeah.
The stereotyping of the band members is so painfully
accurate.
Yeah. Well, in a large part, yeah, I think in general, musicians that make it that big have to have a little bit more intelligence. But in your average garage band, yeah, man, those personality types bear out. It's so funny. that's a wrap, at least until the inevitable reunion tour.
Which is not too far off, actually.
What?
Next year, 2024, is the 40th anniversary of the release of This Is Spinal Tap. A sequel is in pre-production with Reiner McKean, Guest, and Shearer all returning. How excited are we for that?
I cannot.
I had no idea until I was looking stuff up for this, and I saw that Spinal Tap 2 is coming. Is supposed.
How did I miss that?
I'm so looking forward to that.
Listeners and patrons, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Please share us with your friends and your family. Share the podcast. That's the #1 way we grow our audience. Word of mouth is it for us, and that's the way you can support this podcast and keep it going.
And come to our signing at Disc and Dat. Like and subscribe. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can also find... Wow. That slow and low is affecting
not so
my...
slow and not so low, is it?
Speech. You can also find The Hero's Journey on Audible. Don't worry, Mom, I drink responsibly. As well as all major podcast distributors. If you wish to support the podcast financially, please visit patreon.com/heroesjourneypodcast to see if one of the available tiers appeals to you.
GSM, give us some money. Thank you, patrons who support and make this show possible, including our demigod patrons, John Peterson Jr., Scott Sanford, Ricky Garvin, Jeff Scott, Joseph Wilbur, Michelle Calderon, Ami Garvin, Salathiel Jones, Jasmine and Pete Hudson, Mike and Susie Zarzana, and Randy Sparks.
Special thanks to Taylor Jordan for composing our theme music. Thank you also to Jason Dorff for the episode artwork. Links to their portfolios can be found on the About page of heroesjourneypodcast.com. The trademark Hero's Journey is used under license from the Joseph Campbell Foundation. Visit www.jcf.org to learn about how the foundation promotes and celebrates the work of Joseph Campbell.
This is Spinal Tap is copyright 1984 Studio C Anal. Studio Canal. Thanks again for listening.
Good.
Until next time.
Journey on.
If you were to have something written as your epitaph.
Here lies David St. Albans. And why not?
You feel that sums up your...
No, it's the first thing I could think of.
Oh,
It really doesn't sum up anything, really.
Yeah.